All right, what's up everybody? Today's video, as you can tell, is going to be about strength blocks. And this is one of the most common questions that I get on this channel or from clients. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for a while. And randomly today, I just kind of had this, like as a video maker and someone that thinks about this stuff consistently, it was one of those days where I just had, like the ideas were flowing for some reason. And I just kind of got in the zone, typed up a draft, basically from scratch today on a couple ideas that I've had for a long time at this point. I want to take a moment and just go through what this video is going to be and why I'm making this video. So the video is going to be separated into three different parts. Why strength blocks don't work. Quick answer for those of you that are just hanging around for 10 seconds. Number two is going to be, it's actually a downwards move, not just a lateral move from your typical hypertrophy training. It's not an equal, it's actually worse, and there are downsides to it. As you can tell by the title, it's counterproductive. And then number three, why are you questioning it in the first place? And I know why, you might not know why, but here is what you should be doing when you're in that situation. So this is something that is very unique to my own training philosophy. It's going to be a controversial video. I do 100% believe that this is the truth in natural bodybuilding. There's going to be some people that are still stuck in this mindset that haven't quite realized how strength and hypertrophy are correlated, that might not quite understand this video, and that is totally fine. It's okay to disagree with me or be almost like confused or upset when you hear what I'm about to say in this video, but at the end of the day, with this channel, my goal is to speak from the heart, and as a more advanced, I'm not saying I'm an advanced lifter, but as a more advanced and more experienced lifter, I don't want to hold back my best thoughts because people are going to disagree with them. And that's what this channel is. If you're here to hear my thoughts and you like my physique and you like my training methods and you found that they work for you, stick around, and this video is going to provide you a little bit more insight. Whether you like this video or not, that's totally fine. I'm totally okay with it. But I feel like I would be doing you guys a disservice if I didn't speak from the heart and speak the truth, whether it's controversial or it's going to be accepted from the community. So it's not always easy to make these types of videos, especially now that I have a lot more viewers than when I started the channel. But I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't say what I need to say and actually speak my truthful training philosophies on this channel. So let's get to it. That was a pretty solid intro. Strength blocks are counterproductive for hypertrophy. A common question I get on this channel: I'm plateaued in my strength. Should I do a strength block to break the plateau? To define very generally what a strength block is, it's typically a phase of a few weeks to a few months where hypertrophy work is either put on the back burner or put on maintenance in order to prioritize strength in the lower rep range, generally 1 to 5. So part number one, why strength blocks don't actually work for hypertrophy. While this seems logical on paper, it doesn't do anything for you in terms of hypertrophy. Strength training in a lower rep range might build strength, but it doesn't build any extra muscle. In fact, it actually builds a little bit less muscle than training in a little bit of a higher rep range, somewhere between 6 and 20, even up to 30 in special circumstances. So a common thing, and this is a misconception, is that more strength in higher numbers allows you to elicit more hypertrophy in your training. And it's just not true. Think about it in the most simple terms. If in most cases, when you start lifting, your gains each year slowly diminish, and I know it's not linear. In a perfect world, that's probably how it would work, but that's generally not how it works, just because we get smarter as we progress into our training. But if bigger weights produced more hypertrophy, then why, as we get stronger, does our progression in terms of hypertrophy start to slow down? And I know that's very surface level, that's very general, but that's kind of the first logical answer that I have for you guys to start thinking about there. To finish off on that point, when you're decreasing the rep range down to something drastically lower than you're typically training in, it's normal to see like noob gains, and you'll see a little bit of a quick strength increase. And that's not actually building any muscle. If anything, like best case scenario, you picked the right lift and you're just about building as much muscle as you would in a higher rep range, but typically it's either going to be the same amount, best case, or a decent amount less muscle when you're playing around with those lower rep ranges in a strength block. Next one I have here is that you just pick up where you left off when you reintroduce hypertrophy lifts. So a misconception with this is, let's say you run a successful strength block and you build up a decent amount of strength and you just go right back to your hypertrophy work. Let's say you were dumbbell pressing the 60s for about 10 reps per set, and then you come back after a 3-month strength block and you're pressing the 70s for about 10 reps per set. You think that's an increase in stimulus and you think that's an increase in growth, but it doesn't actually mean anything, because at the end of the day, hypertrophy comes from volume accumulation and getting enough quality sets under your belt. When you first notice that you're pressing heavier weights, you think you're getting bigger, but it's just a lateral move. You're just picking up where you left off. You're basically, what happened is you were optimizing your training for hypertrophy. You're using hypertrophy lifts in a hypertrophy rep range with a hypertrophy technique, and what happened is you built a little bit of strength training in strength protocols with strength movements, optimized technique, and rep ranges for building strength. And then you just went right back to hypertrophy. And yeah, obviously your strength went up a little bit, but optimizing a lift for strength and building strength, that type of volume isn't any better. It's actually worse than a form and a technique and a training protocol that's set up to build you muscle. So while our instinct tells us that the 70 pounders means we actually built muscle in that strength block, it doesn't actually mean anything, because you're just a little bit stronger. You still got in the same amount of volume, actually less volume or lower quality volume from the strength block, but muscle grows through volume, not crazy rapid strength progression on strength optimized lifts. And to take a step back out from looking directly at strength blocks compared to hypertrophy, we have to look at what the issue is, because if you're thinking that you need to go do a strength block in order to continue growing your muscle, there's a bigger issue than the rep ranges that you're working in for your training. It fails to address the real issue with your progress, which is either a programming issue, an effort issue, or an outside variable like calories or sleep. If you have everything in check, but you're not in a caloric surplus, you're not going to build muscle. And if your program's perfect, your sleep's perfect, but you're not in a caloric surplus, and your lifts aren't going up, and your muscle size isn't growing, and your weight on the scale isn't going up, a strength block isn't going to change that. You need to eat more. It's the same thing if you're not training hard enough and you're just too far away from failure, or you're just not really trying in your sessions. You can eat all you want to, you can get stronger, and you can get perfect sleep. But if you're not actually trying and the sets you're doing aren't hard enough to actually build muscle in the first place, you're not going to build muscle. So that's ultimately what this comes down to. And when we think a strength block is the solution to our problem, which is not growing muscle and being in a plateau, we're neglecting what's the actual issue, which is either going to be programming, like I said, effort, or an outside factor like nutrition or sleep. And when you think just going into a different style of training is what you need to be that magic spark to get stronger and bust through plateaus, you're missing the point entirely. There's going to be something else wrong. And typically it's going to be the training, or it's going to be the nutrition. Sleep, it doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously, there's optimal and suboptimal sleep, but you can still have suboptimal sleep and make some progress. It just won't be optimal. But if your diet, if you're not in a caloric surplus, you're literally not going to build muscle unless you're in an extreme case, like you're very overweight, or something along the lines of that. But for most people, if you're not in a calorie surplus, you are going to plateau and you are not going to grow. So you have to be bulking. And if you're cutting your strength, you should be trying to keep it the same, maybe increasing, maybe a slight decrease depending on where you're at. You optimize strength by diminishing hypertrophic effects of a lift. A couple examples of this would be optimizing leverages at the expense of muscle activation, or cutting range of motion at the expense of the stretch. You can bench more with a bigger arch and more scapular retraction, but it's at the expense of the stretch. This is just a lateral move at best. And I'll touch more on that one in part number 2. But what I want to finish this first part off with is, it's a bro science quote that I actually as I've gotten more experience with lifting, I've actually really come to love this quote, and I'm sure most of you guys have heard it, is that your muscle doesn't know how much weight is on the bar. And I think that that's almost like the ultimate bro science quote, because it just sums bro science up so perfectly. But it's so true. Your muscle doesn't actually know how much weight's on the bar because you can put it in a disadvantaged position and use a disadvantaged lift when it comes to strength to optimize hypertrophy. And this is like a sneak preview to this next part, which I think is going to be the most important part of this video. Number 2, this is going to be the reality of strength blocks. And I know a lot of us, we're a little bit skeptical, but we have this like glimmer of hope that the strength block is exactly what we need. And this is going to spark us right through that plateau that we're in. I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. Strength blocks aren't even slightly better. It's not even a lateral move. They're actually worse, and you're going to waste time and you're going to waste energy and effort doing a strength block in 99% of cases if your main goal is hypertrophy. The lifts that express more strength do so at the expense of hypertrophy. You're trading hypertrophy for fatigue and an ego boost from the added weight. I'm going to read that first part one more time. The lifts that express more strength do so at the expense of hypertrophy. If you're one of those people that says, it doesn't matter what lift you do, just add 100 pounds to your bench, you'll have a big chest. There is some truth to that, but this is not equal to the example I'm about to compare this to. If you're doing a powerlifting style bench because you like enjoy strength training or whatever, let's say you're doing a big arch, wider grip, and you're optimizing the technique for strength. You're hiding your weaknesses, you're putting your muscle in its strongest position, and you're just trying to load as much weight as you can on the bar. You're going to have to add much more weight to that to have an equal sized chest or triceps or whatever muscle you're targeting with the press. To, let's say somebody's doing like a Larson press with no arch and no scapular retraction, so way more range of motion. They're getting a slightly narrower grip. They're going a little bit slower. They're getting a full range of motion. If you think that when both of these people, it doesn't matter what weight you start at. Let's say the person with the Larson press is starting at 150 and the person with the powerlifting style comp bench is starting at 225. If they each add 100 pounds to their bench, the person with the bench press, the competition style bench press, is going to have obviously a much bigger number because he was already bigger to start and they both added 100 pounds. But the issue with that is that competition style bench doesn't elicit as much hypertrophy as that optimized Larson press that the other person's doing. This is very obvious from the way the lift is set up, and this exact example can apply to basically every muscle. When you try and add that much weight with that optimized of a lift for strength, you're not getting a whole ton of hypertrophy from that lift in the first place. So what ends up happening is you need to keep going and going and going and going. And this leads me into my next point, which is about fatigue with heavier weights. And this isn't something that you will understand if you haven't been at least an advanced level strength athlete or power lifter in the past, which I have been. I was 178 body weight when I maxed out everything with a 1400 total. Pretty good big three. Obviously, it's not like elite in the lifting industry or whatever, but it's strong enough to really understand how the stuff works, and it's stronger than most people that are probably watching this video. And I'm not trying to say that to like boost my own ego, because I don't care about strength anyways, and that's very obvious. I think if you don't know that by now, you probably haven't watched my channel too much. I'm saying that to show you my experience and show you that I actually know what I'm talking about with this. And I have firsthand experience with this, and obviously I've noticed the same thing with other advanced lifters. Heavier weights are no more hypertrophic than any lighter weight, as long as proximity to failure is equated. Heavier weights are actually more fatiguing, which comes at the expense of effort on your following sets, effort later in the week, or from total accumulation by needing frequent breaks and deloads. This is a very important point, and I understand that it doesn't apply to most lifters with where you are right now, but getting to this point is totally avoidable by just not optimizing strength. All you have to do is obviously still slowly continue to get stronger. That is a byproduct of building muscle, but you should be doing it in hypertrophy lifts. There is no reason why you should be doing a comp style bench or a sumo deadlift when you could be doing something much more optimized for hypertrophy, where you can use much less weight and get equal, if not better, results with way less fatigue. This one hits home because this is the first, the fatigue from the heavy weights. This is like the first thing that broke me out of my like power building type mindset. I got so strong at some lifts that eventually you just get burned out from training. And I actually quit lifting for about 6 or 7 months a couple years ago because I was fried. I was toast. So I had two options. I could either push through it, which is the best thing to do for bodybuilding. Not in that situation, but the best thing to do for bodybuilding is to be a little fatigued, but continue to keep going in and getting your work in. Hypertrophy lifts aren't going to fatigue you too much, but obviously if you're training in some capacity, you're going to have a little bit of fatigue. It's just how it is, and that's totally fine. Nothing wrong with a little systemic fatigue sitting there in your system. But when you're training like a powerlifter and you're using a power building type program and you're executing it with a bodybuilding approach, the fatigue you accumulate and the fatigue that you build from that, you have two options. You can either push through it until you burn out and take months off of lifting like I did. And I'm not saying you have to take as long as I did off, or you can take very frequent deloads. And I'm talking like at that point, like every 4 weeks. And in the long term, if you have to deload every 4 weeks or every 3 weeks or whatever, you're missing about 20 to 25% of the volume that you could have been accumulating this whole time. So that's like saying, all right, I've been training for 10 years. That's like taking 2.5 years off of training after 10 years. So when you've been training for 10 years and deloading every 3 or 4 weeks, you've really only been training for 7.5 years. And I think putting it into that big picture like that, where 10 years that's a big chunk of our lives. If you're missing out on that much of your training, you're not training the right way. And short term, which is how most people think, you don't worry about it because you're like, oh, what's 1 week off every now and then? A deload doesn't really matter. It's not going to change my results. I'll look the same either way. It doesn't matter. That's not the way to think about bodybuilding, because bodybuilding isn't short term. Bodybuilding is a game of habits and a game of programming, and it's how you end up at the end of that journey. And that's 100% what it's about. And that isn't something you can understand until you've been there before. And that's why I like to take my experience and take the knowledge that I got from that experience and share it to you guys, whether you're going through it now or you're about to go through it and you're kind of deciding what you want to do with your future, or if you're a total beginner. It's something that you should be aware of. And that's why I know a lot of the stuff I put out is for intermediate or advanced lifters, 100%. But I also think it's very important for beginners to start understanding what it's like to train as an intermediate or advanced lifter. Understanding what the future of this holds for you is going to be super important. You might as well get ahead on your knowledge while you can, rather than not really know what to do when you arrive at that place. And part number 3, how did you end up here in the first place? Why are you looking to do a strength block? There's one simple reason for this. You think you're in a plateau. You're not building muscle. All right, that makes sense. So if you aren't building muscle, the first thing you need to do is fact check yourself. If you feel like you're not building muscle because you feel like you don't look bigger than before, or you don't feel as big as you should, or maybe your strength isn't going up as fast as you should, that's not an actual plateau. I'm not saying it couldn't be a plateau, but you have to actually fact check some of this stuff. I've had certain people that I've talked to, whether it's real life, a client of mine, or on the channel itself, where people think that they're in a plateau. We reflect on their training, we reflect on the numbers and say, actually, you're far from it. You're actually progressing very fast. If you take the progression that you've done in the past 4 weeks, 15 weeks, 25 weeks or whatever, and you consistently do that for the next 5 years, you'd be pressing this much or lifting this much on that lift. You're not in a plateau at all. You have to zoom out a little bit. And there are many ways you can assess if you're actually in a plateau. I'm a huge advocate of measuring your changes and measuring your progress in the most ways possible. And I'm not saying to go out of your way by any means, but if you're lifting, just record your strength. Record the lifts you're doing, record what you did, make sure it's all good. Once a month, take progress photos. Pick a few poses you like, front, back, and side, relaxed and flexed. Pick a few poses, pick a few photos that are generally in similar lighting and angles. Measure those over time. If you don't look bigger from 1 month to the next, it's 1 month. Don't worry about it. But having these things quarter after quarter, year after year to look back at is going to be huge. Same goes for measurements. Measure your muscles, guys. Photos are for the visual. Measurements are for the actual numbers. Strength is for the numbers in the gym. Record your weight on the scale too. I think that's very important, at least a couple times a week. And when you combine all these variables, you have a very accurate assessment of if you're actually making progress. And the problem is, a lot of people make emotional, impulsive decisions when it comes to their programming. And they're like, oh, I feel like I'm stuck. Let me just jump into a strength block, or let me make crazy changes to my volume. And that's never the way to go about your training. You want to make factual decisions over long periods of time, checking trends in your training. That's 100% the way to do it. So first step, fact check yourself. If you don't know if you're in a plateau or not because you haven't been tracking, stick with what you're doing. If you're not sure, track for at least 3 months. Go from there. Make assessments if you need to. You also want to, another way that you can potentially bypass a plateau. Let's say you are actually in a plateau and you haven't built any muscle or any strength or put on any weight in a while. This is a programming one. Manipulate your intensity, aka the rep range. So let's say something like the rep goal system, for example. If you are, let's say you started at 25 total reps across 3 sets, your total rep goal is going to be 40 for the barbell curls. If you're stuck at 34 and you've been hitting it for weeks in a row, it's not the worst thing to stick with it. Maybe another lift is progressing and that's proof that you're building some muscle. But if your program is in general stalling out, maybe just call it at that and make a little manipulation, up the weight to go back to that 25 and see how that goes this next time. You can adjust the rep goals accordingly if needed, but this isn't something that you should be changing and messing around with in the short term. You want to do this over a little bit of a long period of time and make rational decisions, make factual decisions from there. Last point I have here is to optimize your lifts for hypertrophy, not for strength. Find lifts that work better for you and emphasize factors that facilitate hypertrophy. Get a good stretch on your lifts. Go a little bit slower. Don't have crazy arches in your bench press. Don't go with a crazy wide grip. Don't use all hips in your squats. Go a little bit below parallel. Find ways to maximize your knee flexion. I just rattled off a bunch of ways that you can effectively prioritize hypertrophy and bias hypertrophy in the lifts that you're doing in your program. The reason why people are so afraid of this is because your strength has to go down when you do things like this. And when it comes to programming and when it comes to picking lifts and optimizing lifts for hypertrophy, you have to find ways to make the lift more challenging to that muscle you're trying to target for multiple reasons, as I've already covered in this video. So that's all the programming. If you fix all that and nothing's changing, you need to eat a little bit more if you're in a bulk, or not worry about it if you're in a cut. That's all I've got for the video today. I know it was a lot. If you disagree or if you agree, I'd love to talk to you in the comments. Leave a comment. Even if I don't reply to you, I'd love to hear your input. I read every single comment. So I appreciate you guys watching. I will see you in 48 hours probably.